I keep a spare length of timing belt in my pocket, like a rosary. Habit. You never shake off the uniform once you've worn it, as long as I have, and you never kick a good ritual either. Mine has always been engines, fixing them, listening to the way metal talks when it's ready to die. It's funny that the one thing that saved me down there wasn't my badge or my sidearm, but a nose for machinery and a sixth sense for when a motor is about to cough its last. My name is Brian Norris. I grew up outside Topeka, Kansas, and I moved east when the department there offered me a slot with better pay. I'm a police officer, and when I'm not pulling shifts, I rebuild old Crown Vic interceptors and drive the mountain roads like they're kind of a prayer. I've got a wife, Jenna, and a daughter, Ellie. I need you to know that from the start, because every choice I made in that bunker, every stupid risk I took, was because I kept seeing my little girl with peanut butter on her cheeks, and my wife saying my name the way she does when she's not mad, but pretending to be. That's the real reason I'm alive. Not training, not guts. Just a voice in my head saying, "Get home, Brian." I didn't walk into the Blue Ridge bunker on purpose. I walk inside it. I know how that sounds, like an excuse or a bad dream, but that's how it was. 1 second, I was on a narrow road west of Spruce Pine, North Carolina, looking for a hiker who's gone missing. Just a welfare check the county asked us to assist with because I knew the switchbacks. And the next, I was on a cement floor with the worst headache of my life, my mouth tasting like pennies, and the overhead lights stuttering through brownout. The hum that brought me back was a generator running on fumes. I know that tone. A health generator sings like a sewing machine. This one coughed and hesitated, gasping in a way that tells you there's water in the fuel or the tank's pulling in the last oily vapor from the bottom. The lights gave me enough to see that I was in a corridor with painted cinder block walls, white ones scuffed to gray, doors every 20 feet, numbered in black stencils. I saw my own boot prints in a smear of something like mud, only it was too dark, too sticky. And there were drag marks. Something had been hauled the length of the corridor. I didn't recognize the place, but my gear was there, my belt, my Glock, a maglite with a knurled body, and my radio. The radio hissed with static, no carrier. Somebody had taped a note to my flashlight, a strip of blue painter's tape with block letters. Bright light only, no talking. Then a crude drawing of an eye crossed out. It should have made no sense, but it did, real fast. I found the first body 10 steps later. He was lying face down, one arm stretched like he was reaching for the door handle, boots still on. The back of his jacket had been shredded from waist to shoulders, not like clothes, but like the whole piece of clothing had been sucked through a grate. I rolled him over because I could not, and his face was raked, lips drawn back, eyes open and filmed. He'd bled out fast. The floor was glued with it, dark and tacky. The name patch on his chest said C. Velasquez. He was wearing a plain khaki overshirt and utility pants, not quite military, not quite civilian. I've seen contractors dress like that, the kind of guys who show up when somebody doesn't want questions. He had a sidearm and an empty holster for a flare gun. The smell in that corridor was bleach and iron and something else. Wet soil maybe, like what comes up when you dig where the ground's cold. I kept moving. 2 more bodies before the control room, one slumped by a steel door labeled armory. That one looked like she'd broken her own fingers trying to open it. No blood. Her eyes were wrong, pupils blown, huge, like she died in the dark. Someone had scratched 3 words into the door with what must have been a knife or a key. Be quiet. Light. I didn't say anything, even in shock. I can be a good student. The control room looked like an old TV station thrown into a storm cellar. Monitors stacked in black frames, a long table with switchgear and meters, the smell of hot dust. One wall had a corkboard with maps and printouts, red yarn and pushpins threading them together. That's where the name jumped out at me. Even now, it makes my stomach turn. Crawler. Under it were photocopied reports. Some looked like they'd been grabbed off internet forums. Hunters' stories from West Virginia hollers. Police incident reports with the victims' names blacked out. Old newspaper clippings about mole men and pale hounds that ate roots and rabbits but had eyes like a man's. A grainy game camera still showed a shape in the angle of 2 trees, low to the ground, too white in the flash, and wrong all over. It looked like a person who'd been bent and left out in the rain until the joints forgot which way to point. On a legal pad, someone had written in sharp pencil, sensitive to bright white light, ranges by sound and vibrations, avoids open daylight, burrows, doesn't like heat, kills quickly, feeds slow. There were notes from a biologist maybe, no hair, translucent skin, digging forelimbs fused, pelvis adapted to quadrupedal gallop, smart. A tremor went through the floor under my boots like a subway train passing far below. Just a little pressure wave, cement dust fell from a crack where the ceiling met the wall and got in my eyelashes. I froze. The generator coughed, the lights flickered, stammered, then caught. Something moved on one of the monitors, camera 12, corridor D, grainy black and white. A shadow peeled off a corner and flattened itself along the wall, 4-limbed, smooth as spilled milk. It held absolutely still for a long minute. The gray image lines jittered. Then it drew itself forward by the fingerprints with a slow, patient glide. I'd never seen an animal move like that. It was like a nightmare you have when you've been sick. Your skin buzzing, your brain skipping a track. I clicked my mag light on without thinking, then off again immediately. My own hands startling me in the reflection of the glass. There was a whiteboard with a diagram of the bunker. Not huge, a spoke and hub layout drilled back into the mountain. There was a generator room, a lab, dorms. One arm led to a secondary access burrow exit, unstable. Someone had written in the red marker, "Collapsed 3 days ago?" Another arm had explanation, storage demolitions. A line drawn between them had a big X and the word "don't" underlined twice. The intercom panel had lines for the different sections. All the indicator LEDs were dead except for gen room and explosives. Both showed a weak orange pulse, like old Christmas lights. I didn't talk into anything. I couldn't shake the feeling that my voice would carry through the ducts and behind the walls like a dinner bell. In the corner, next to a plastic tub of earplugs, A spiral notebook was open. The last thing written was a half sentence. If anyone makes it back here, refuel Jenny from blue drums. Not red. Red is burn mix. No speaking. Click only. Below it was a list of clicks. 1 click, OK. 2, move. 3, danger. 4, light. 5, door. I took the notebook and the pen like a totem and stuffed both under my belt. Then I shouldered my way out, with the flashlight gripped tight because the hum of the generator had hiccuped again, and the darkness behind the flicker beat down on my nerves like a dog. The first time I heard it up close, I thought it was water running through a pipe in the walls. Then the water got teeth. It was a scratching steady and patient, not frantic. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch. Like something doubling its hand into a spade and digging through the mortar. I kept my feet light, rolling off the edge of my boots so the heel wouldn't punch a warning into the floor. They'd written it everywhere. Sound attracts. My throat closed around the urge to swallow. I went right, then right again, toward Jen's room, and I passed more bodies. I wish I could tell you I paused for each of them, that I covered faces and said names out loud. I didn't. I took their ammo, if they had any, and kept moving. The third body I passed was a woman with freckles, like thumbprints across the bridge, on her nose. She had a wedding band. I remember that because I wouldn't take it off. She had a handheld work light slung across her chest, the kind you use under a car, with a cage around the bulb and a hook. I took that. There were 2 extra bulbs in her pocket. I took those too. Her flare gun was missing, but in the pocket of her jacket, wrapped in a handkerchief, was a single 12-gauge shell, crimped at the nose with a waxy pale residue. Somebody had written magnesium light on the side with a Sharpie. The gen room door was a slab of steel with a porthole. Through it, I saw the generator, a big old Cummins, shuddering to its mouth. The sight calmed me. Machines make sense. They have parts and those parts either work or don't. I cracked the door very carefully and stepped into a heat that had the baked bread quality of summers in Kansas. The noise was a wall. Good. If noise attracted those things, maybe this room was a place they avoided. The smell was diesel and something burned. There were drums against the wall, red and blue, like on the notebook. I checked the labels. The red ones were stenciled, stove, ignition mix, do not use in gen. The blue said, number 2, diesel. The side glass on the generator's fuel tank showed a line flirting with empty. I found a hand pump and worked it slow, 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 because even in that noise I couldn't shake the idea that my clumsy rhythm would set a metronome for something listening in the walls. It took 5 minutes and my arms were jelly. I cracked the bleed screw and chased air until Diesel puked and ran. The engine's voice deepened, settled. Good girl, I thought, without meaning to. Hold together. When the lights steadied, the whole world sharpened. The corridors turned from guesswork into distances. I could see where the scratches in the cinder block had a direction, downward, as if something tunneled from above and then fell through. In spots, the paint had been rubbed down to the blocks by something that preferred corners and hugged them close, learning the geometry of the place like a blind thing maps a room with its hands. On the way out of the gen room, I saw movement through the porthole just as I grabbed the handle to pull the door and felt it. A thump through the sole of my boot, heavy and soft, like the whole mountain had a heartbeat. I froze and angled the work light so the bulb faced the floor and my own reflection vanished from the round window. It came from under the catwalk, just at the edge where the light bounced and failed. A pale, hairless shoulder first, then an arm that was not an arm but a shovel of bone with fingers at the end, each too long and too even, the nails not nails but a spoon-like scooping edge. The rest of it was flat against the concrete, a man shape stretched until it didn't understand man anymore. The head rose last, as if out of respect. There was a face, but it was the idea of a face. Nose pressed against the skin from inside, mouth too wide and lipless, and the eyes, I have to get this right, were like the inside of a seashell, that pearly, milk blue shine, and they went huge when the work light's tired bulb caught them. It stopped. It hated the brightness. I saw the whole body flinch like a camera shutter. It gathered itself into the corner where the catwalk met the wall, as if trying to become a shadow, and when something in the generator backfired, just a little cough, it darted, a silent flock of movements compressed into one, up into a gap in the cinder block where a conduit had been knocked loose. It was gone. Only a smear of dust turning in the light said it had ever been there. I stood very still until my heartbeat learned to imitate the hum of the engine. Then I remembered to breathe. The whiteboard map said the burrow exit was in the furthest spoke from where I stood, past the dorms and the mess. I had to get there because if the generator died and the lights went, the only thing left would be sound, and I didn't want to imagine how I'd taste when that brought them running. And yes, them. I didn't let myself say it yet, but I knew. Burrowers aren't solitary. You don't dig a city with one spoon. The dorms were wrecked, bunks overturned, sheets shredded, personal stuff sprayed across the floor like the inside of a suitcase after TSA takes a special interest. I found more names, Ramirez, Klein, Young, and I looked at their faces in ID lanyards, because nobody should die anonymous. A little pinned corkboard had snapshots of someone's kid on a tricycle, a funny coffee mug collection, a recipe for something called Coal Camp Casserole. The sight of normal life broke me worse than the bodies. I swallowed it because I had to. One click with my tongue against my teeth. Okay, to the empty room and my own idiot superstition. And I moved on. I almost didn't hear the first scrape because I was thinking about the fuel and the route and whether I could carry more than one flare if I found them. It came from behind the kitchen service hatch, a soft, deliberate test of metal on metal, then another, closer. I didn't think I didn't test. I jammed the work light up under the hatch and tumbled it on, flooding the stainless with unkind light. There was a sound like a gasp, almost human, and the hatch bucked once, twice, before something retreated into the duct with a twitching, insect quickness. When it was gone, an oval of condensation remained on the steel, like someone had pressed a mouth to it and breathed. I started to understand the game then. There was a corridor near the burrow exit, where the floodlights had burned out. The cable had been chewed straight through, not bitten, chewed with patience and with a kind of mind. The concrete wall showed little starter holes, like a woodpecker had been set on it. I kept the work light swinging and my mag light ready. If the generator died, the maglight's battery was my candle for the world. I say burrow exit, but that makes it sound like a door. It was a tunnel chewed through aggregate and clay, wide as a man, low enough to make you crawl. A round of ductwork had been crushed like a can and then pushed aside, ribs sticking out. The first 10 feet were braced with mismatched lumber shipping pallets, 2x4s, a metal bed frame broken and set like a crib. There was a rope tied to the first brace, a camp light hanging from it. A hand-lettered sign said, "Daylight ahead, 200 feet, keep lights on." Under that, in a different hand, "Do not run, quiet is life." A note was stacked just inside on a piece of cardboard ripped from a cereal box. We tried. We got 7 through. They hunt the sound, keep the light in their eyes and move. Behind me the generator hiccuped again. The hum thinned and recovered. I crouched and slid into the hole on my elbows, flashlight in one hand, work light dangling from my belt on its hook, the cords pulling out behind me. The world turned into breath, heartbeat, grit grinding in my teeth. I made it 30 feet before I heard them, plural, no pretending otherwise, moving in the walls. Not like rats, heavy but careful heavy, the way you step when you're sneaking past a sleeping baby. Dirt sifted down in a little brown rain onto my neck. I kept the light ahead, swinging in arcs, and then the tunnel bent left. I saw the shine of daylight at a distance, like a coin at the bottom of a well. I wanted to run so bad my knees shook. Quiet is life, I told myself. I pictured Ellie's crayon drawings stuck to the fridge with magnets. The one of me as a stick figure with an enormous car. "Daddy's big car," she'd written. "Quiet is life." Something touched my boot. I didn't kick, I didn't jerk. I turned the flashlight down and met a hand sliding out of the dirt, like a thing being born. It stopped at once. The skin wasn't really skin. It was what a potato looks like, where the eye has grown too deep and turned translucent. My beam burned into it and the hand flinched back. The scrape of its retreat went up and down the tunnel like a comb through hair. Then another hand behind me, this time reaching. I turned that way too. They hated it. I could feel the recoil travel through the soil. I kept moving, slow line dance, keeping the light in constant motion. Red counted in 4s, 3 clicks in my head for danger, 4 for light. I don't know why, sometimes a rhythm is all you have. I made it another 20 feet. The daylight got bigger, the air changed. There was the smallest taste of green in it, like rain on leaves. That's when the generator finally choked. I felt the whole bunker slacken through the earth, the way a house seems to exhale when the AC cuts off, and the camp light tied to my belt dimmed with a little sound like a throat clearing. The tunnel tightened around me, a whisper of nails on stone ran forward ahead of me and behind me at the same time. The sound kinked the wire on my spine. I dropped the work light into the dirt and used my free hand to fish the mag shell out of my pocket. I didn't think through the physics of firing a flare round in a tunnel. I thought about my daughter and about the diagram that said daylight. I wormed the 12-gauge shell into the flare gun I'd picked up off the armory guard. It was heavy in my hand. Cheap aluminum and weight, a tool no one thinks is a tool until it is. And I held the maglite in my teeth, and I fired into the ceiling above me. It was not a bang so much as a white flower opening and then becoming everything. The magnesium burned into the clay and cinder with a hiss like an ocean poured through a straw. The tunnel turned into a greenhouse, white light, heat, then a kiln. Dry, immediate. The thing nearest me, one of them almost within reach, went from invisible to engraved. Every tendon in the hand stood out like wire. The eyes went huge, then narrower than you'd think possible, shrinking to the width of a pencil line. I saw its mouth open. The inside wasn't a mouth like anything I'd known. It was a flat space with little pebbled teeth set into it like a quernstone. It passed itself into the earth, trying to push through, and the whole wall flexed, signed, "You haven't lived until you've watched dirt breathe." I kept the flashlight on and pushed while the magnesium burned. That round had been packed for show, brighter than hot, blinding rather than explosive. It bought me 30 seconds. I used all of them. I used more than I had. I crawled until my elbows burned and the skin on my knees felt like someone had sanded it away. Another scrape came, a little ahead this time, and then the wall to my right bulged and the head came through like a fish being forced through a hole in ice. The eyes were so wrong, not crazy, not animal even, just blank, like it knew I was a thing that made sound and heat, and it knew what to do with that. I put the flashlight straight in its eyes. It paused. I took that pause and rammed the butt of the flare gun into the soft part where its brow should have been. The flare gun is not built for that. The aluminum bent. It didn't matter. The thing withdrew with a convulsive, efficient motion, and a spatter of dirt fell into the space it had been. Daylight poured in, not full, but enough. A wash of grey-green, the smell of moss. I think I started laughing then, a quiet, breathless thing, the kind of laugh you let out when you find a bolt that fits after you've been knuckle-deep in an engine bay for an hour. I dragged myself forward, turned the last bend, and saw the exit, a mouth of broken roots and torn earth opening into a rhododendron thicket. The light had that syrupy summer quality, Blue Ridge in July, all the leaves lacquered with heat and singing insects, calm, still, except for the tiny movements of living things that have nothing to do with you. I didn't stand up, I slithered into the bushes like something that had been born wrong and found the sun by accident. The relief that washed through me was a sickness. I lay on my belly and listened to my own heartbeat slowing. Down in the tunnel, something ran its fingers along the brace behind me. Then something else. Then silence. Not gone. Waiting, like it had a watch. I remember the map. Explosives. Don't. The word pulsed in my head like an artery. Don't. Because there were people in there. Because you don't blow your own route. Because if you get it wrong, you drop the mountain on yourself. But the generator was dead. The last of the work lights filament was a tiny coal. I could leave and hope, or I could go back in long enough to make sure nothing followed. Not today, not up into the trees where kids would play hide and seek next Saturday if the weather held. I slid back a foot. The shade did its work. The first fingernail eased through the crumbly edge of the tunnel like a spoon through pudding. The sound it made went up my spine like a zipper. No. I backed into the light again and let my eyes adjust to green. My hand shook like I'd been working an impact driver for an hour. I looked around for a branch, a rock, anything, and found a rusted shovel propped against the tree. Someone else had dragged dirt here before. Someone who'd thought the same thought. I used it to throw armfuls of earth down into the hole. The first few slid away, like trying to cover a pond with a blanket. Then enough dirt fell in that the hole narrowed and the walls reacted. I felt the ground recoil almost imperceptibly, like it didn't like its mouth being filled. I kept going quiet as I could, because every shove was a drumbeat. When the shovel's edge scraped the root and the sound went ringing down the throat, I saw an arm lance up, white as onion flesh, questing. The light made it hesitate. It hung there like a truce flag, then withdrew. I piled more dirt, braced the edges with rocks. I broke off 2 thick branches and wedged them in, crosswise, like a poor man's portcullis. It wouldn't keep anything determined out for long, but it would buy time. Time was everything now. I took the shovel and went looking for the other end of Don't. The explosives arm of the bunker had a separate access, a quarter-mile down slope, hidden under a slumped cinder block shed, with a door you'd miss if you didn't know to kick the rot out of the lower left corner. I knew because I'd seen the whiteboard, and because once you've spent time around people who do dangerous work, you learn their habits, extra exits, tools cached in dumb places, little codes that look like trash but aren't. The shed smelled like mouse nest and old rain. I pried the door and went inside, held my breath and listened. No scratching, no signs. Only the patient tick of summer. I lifted a plywood sheet and found a switch tied to a bundle of ancient wire. There was a battery too, old but not dead, and a detonator box the size of a lunch pail, its face labeled with the kind of labels the government used in the 70s. Fire, main charge. Fire, secondary. Somebody had chalked hashes above both, 3 tallies, then a slash. 4 counts for something, a ritual for getting out alive. I stood there with my hand on the handle and imagined the map. The don't line, the borough exit, the dorms. If I got the main charge wrong, I'd pop the tunnel like a zit and send the rest bursting outward. If I got it right, I could slam a plug into the thing's throat. The people who'd been here before had thought about that. They drawn the line in anger and love and duty. Maybe they tried. Maybe it had gone bad. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for the sweat to cool on my back. Long enough for the sound of insects to become a grid I could see. Then I put the shovel down and I put my hand on the old bakelite handle and I asked my wife's voice in my head what she'd say. She said, "Get home, Brian, and don't bring any of that with you." I cranked it 3 times, because that's what the tallies wanted. Then I pushed the fire secondary, because if I learned one thing working cars in high school, it's that the old guys always wire the main to the thing they don't really want to go off. The shed didn't even tremble. I thought maybe it was dead. Then the mountain coughed, a low, soft sound like a giant clearing his throat down low. Birds lifted out of the trees like someone had thrown gravel at them. A half second later, a wind moved through the leaves inward toward the hill, a sucking as if the ground had taken a huge drink. I staggered and caught myself on the door frame and realized I'd been bracing for something else. For fire and smoke and tumbling rock. What I got was a shudder. Then still. I didn't know if I'd bought a day or a decade. I only knew that the green stayed green, and the air stayed air, and nothing pale came peeling up out of the dirt to take my face off. I walked out of the trees with the shovel, like Moses with his staff, and came to the service road where the county keeps its gravel. My radio was dead, my phone was dead, my throat felt like I'd been screaming, though I hadn't. I followed the road until a truck came around the bend with a decal on the door that said Pisum National Forest, Wildland. The guy behind the wheel took one look at me and said, "You hurt?" I shook my head. "You lost?" I shook it again. He looked at my shredded knees and the dirt smeared into my ears and the bent flare gun in my hand and said, very quiet, "You found it, didn't you?" I didn't answer. He didn't ask again. He let me sit in his passenger seat and drink water and look at his dashboard, which was blessedly cluttered with receipts and sunglasses and the cheap pine tree air freshener that made the cab smell like a barber shop. Civilization is a scent sometimes. He drove me down the mountain to where my cruiser sat, canted on the shoulder with the door still open. The body camera had been snapped off its mount and lay on the seat like a dropped tooth. The heat made the interior smell like vinyl. I drove home with my window down. I told Jenna the kind of lie you tell when the truth will take everything you love and turn it into foam. I said I'd slid on a rocky trail. I said I'd been lost a few hours. I said the searchers found the missing hiker's camp and that was the end of it. She put a hand on my cheek and I had to close my eyes because I didn't want her to see what I'd brought out of the dark. Ellie asked if I'd caught a bad guy. "No, baby," I said, and my voice sounded like it was being rubbed on stone. "No bad guys today." That night, I sat at my workbench in the garage, the smell of oil and old metal like another kind of church. I took apart the bent flare gun. I cleaned my mag light. I laid the timing belt on the table like a snake and ran my hands along its teeth, feeling the good rhythm of something meant to move and meant to hold. Then I did what I probably shouldn't have done. I opened my laptop and searched for the word that had sat like a burr under my skin since I'd seen it on the corkboard. Crawler. People call them in the Appalachians. Tunnel men, pale souls, moles. There are more stories than a sane person would want to read. A boy who followed his dog into a drainage culvert and came back with eyes like saucers, refusing to go outside after dark for the rest of his life. A man who laid sheet metal under his house because he couldn't stand the sound of fingers on the underside of the floorboards. A woman who walked to the light on in her hallway and found long fingerprints on her light switch, as if someone had stood there for an hour watching, unable to cross the line into the brightness. I found a forum thread from 2009 where an old miner out near Buchanan wrote, "We always feared the hollow spots, not the collapse so much as the airs. Sometimes you hear breathing where there isn't any, and sometimes that's a lie, and sometimes it isn't." He said he'd seen something squeeze between cribbing and stone that no human ribs could have managed. He said light was kindness and noise was murder. I bookmarked it, I printed it, I folded it and put it in my wallet, because when I close my eyes now, I see the way that hand came up through the dirt, like an apology. If you are wondering why I'm telling you this, it's because we moved. and I can't work on the house without thinking about what's under it. I can't watch Ellie push her toy car along the floor without listening for that false note of hollow wood. I keep floodlights in the crawl spaces. I keep batteries in quantities that make Jenna shake her head and smile and call me ridiculous. I built her an outdoor kitchen because she loves to grill, and I made the patio light so bright it looks like a used car lot. She pestered me about it until I said, "Humor me." Back in the Blue Ridge, someone will go to that shed, or maybe nobody will. Maybe the mountain will eat it whole. People will go missing doing normal human things, and a handful of cops and volunteers will beat the tree lines and come back with burrs in their socks and stories they don't put in reports. I wrote an email to a person whose name I recognized from one of those clippings, a woman who'd signed her letter to the editor, Klein, former site tech. I didn't send it. I don't know if she's the same Klein who was in that dorm, freckles like pennies, or if Klein is a name that belongs to someone whose eyes I never saw. I don't know if the charges I fired closed the throat or just made it pick a new mouth. The other day I changed the oil in my neighbor's little Honda because he's a decent kid and he doesn't know a wrench from a pasta fork. Ellie sat on the curb and asked if I still catch bad guys. "Sometimes," I said. "Mostly I fix things." She said, "Can you fix the ground?" And then laughed because she's 5 and she meant the stupid crack in the sidewalk that trips her when she runs. I laughed too, the way you do when your body finds a laugh and your brain is somewhere else entirely. Listen, this isn't a report. There aren't case numbers and timestamps. It's just me, standing in my garage, telling you what happened because I can hear the hum of my little generator under the workbench. Yes, I bought one, and yes, I maintain it like a nervous habit. And because when it kicks over and hits its groove, my mind settles. Machines have voices, so do mountains, so do things that crawl in the places we pretend are solid. If you ever find yourself in a place that feels like the inside of a closed hand, don't waste your breath on shouting. Save it for crawling. Keep your light bright and not for looking around but for looking at. There's a difference. And if you hear scratching, don't comfort yourself that it might be water. Water doesn't make decisions. Water doesn't wait. I learned that in a bunker in the Blue Ridge, in the soft green heart of summer, where the world above smelled like hay and gasoline, and the world below smelled like pennies and old earth. And the line between the two was held for a few minutes by a man with a flashlight and a flare, and a picture in his head of a kid with peanut butter on her cheeks. If you ever have to choose, that picture will find you like gravity. It will tell you which wire to cut, which charge to fire, which hole to fill. It told me. I listened, and I came home.